Welcome to Wavelengths, a podcast with Amphenol Broadband Solutions.
What's going on, y'all? It's Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and welcome to another episode of Wavelengths, an Amphenol Broadband Solutions podcast. It's good to be back in the ABS hot seat here as we continue to unpack the major trends, technologies, timely news, and thought leaders that are shaping the future of the broadband and fiber, and more generally, telecom industries. Again, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. It's great to have you here on Wavelengths. Make sure that you're subscribing on Apple Podcasts and Spotify and heading to our website, amphenolbroadband.com. Again, amphenolbroadband.com for more information on our solutions and services, but of course, for other episodes, right, of the podcast and other good resources. If you're a return guest, welcome back. Great to have you listening in. And let's go ahead and jump into the meat of today's episode. So today we are talking the future of fiber, right? Which is something we've covered on the show before, right? At a high level, it's not necessarily treading new ground, but our guest is a new one with unique experience that we can learn from at his time working with Hotwire Communications. We'll go ahead and tee him up here in a second. But again, when we talk future of fiber, we're not just talking technology that's pushing speeds past 25 gigabits per second, right? We're not just talking about the strategic thinking or the community-centered design that is going to unlock the full value of the future of fiber. We're really talking about the intersection of all of these moving pieces and how they are shaping strategies for fiber deployment and collaboration from the different interested parties, whether that is the telcos, the businesses receiving improved fiber, municipalities and regional authorities helping put the money behind these projects, right? So as we talk about the future of fiber, we're looking at all those moving pieces intersecting, and we're going to learn from our guest today and some of his approaches working in the industry to get a better sense for the strategies that work and why. So our guest today is Pragash Pillai. He is the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer at Hotwire Communications. He's a broadband veteran whose leadership spans some of the most influential names in the industry, whether we're talking Cablevision to Charter to now Hotwire Communications. And now, again, at the helm of a fast-growing fiber-first ISP, Pillai is combining operational precision with big-picture thinking. And he's here to give us a look at the technologies that are building the foundation of smarter, more adaptable networks for specific verticals, things like senior living or higher education housing, for example. So today we're going to unpack more specifically Hotwire's 25G and 50G PON trials to tell us a little bit more about scaling performance without overhauling infrastructure per se, how to translate fiber innovation into real-world value for distinct customer bases, and this interplay of customer experience, engineering, and long-term strategy guiding modern fiber rollouts. Let's go ahead and welcome our guest to the show, Mr. Pragash Pillai, Chief Technology Officer at Hotwire Communications. Pragash, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Good. Thank you, Daniel, for having me. Very excited to have this discussion together.
Yeah, it's a pleasure getting to source your perspectives today. Thanks again for your time. I mentioned a little bit there on your background, but just so our audience better understands your POV here, could you give us the elevator pitch summary on some of your work surrounding cutting-edge fiber deployments and what your perspective is going to be on the podcast today, how your experience influences your outlook?
I think I bring a probably unique perspective because I started my career on hybrid fiber coax environment, right? The typical HFC, the traditional HFC, started that 25 years ago. And last few years has been focusing on rolling out fiber technology, meaning taking fiber closer to the customer. And with Hotwire, Hotwire is a company that focusing on only fiber deployment. And it brings a unique perspective comparing to my previous experience to what I'm challenged with now. How do we make our service better? How do we make our customer experience better? And focusing on more cohesive solution versus what you mentioned earlier, just the technology. I think from my perspective, I think deploying fiber network is something that everybody's out there doing. If you look at the growth on the number of fiber households in the US, but how do you provide those, seamless service to the end user is what we are focusing on at Hotwire.
Well, we're excited to tap into that experience and some of your more recent work again at Hotwire to get a sense for what the future of fiber rollout strategies look like today, taking into account all the technology evolutions and some of the evolutions around the interplay of the various interested stakeholders, right, that are helping motivate these rollouts. So let's go ahead and dive in. I want to start by drawing some real world lessons from Hotwire's work. So Hotwire recently saw success with some trials with Nokia for 25G and 50G PON. These are some of the first of their kind in North America, which is pretty awesome. And they've been setting a benchmark, honestly, for what's technically possible on a fiber network today. But tech specs are not the only story here, right? It's really about the capabilities that this technology can unlock and how the industry can practically deploy them at scale. So tell me a little bit about these 25G and 50G trials that y'all rolled out with Nokia and Hotwire, right? What did they teach your team about the readiness of their existing optical distribution networks, right, to support ultra high speeds? Did you find there was an incongruence with existing infrastructure and needed infrastructure? What were the main takeaways that y'all learned from those trials?
Essentially, we are expecting no issue. And interestingly, when we deployed this, our main concern is not so much about our network, because we can expect our network to work. It's more about making sure the end-to-end system with the CPE deliver what we expect, right? It's not just the infrastructure itself, but also the customer premise equipment, because recently, Nokia produced their CPEs commercially available. So our interest mainly to make sure we can get the speed we expect. And the trial proved that. Of course, on the 50 gig side, there's not commercially available CPE yet for customer. When I say commercially available, meaning, price at a point that we can start deploying it for customers. It's still in a lab environment. But 25 gig is a reality. Actually, we have a customer premise equipment that we can deploy. In fact, without going into too much detail, we just deployed that in the field last week to a customer location and still getting the performance that we expect. So, 25 gig PON is a reality. And I think for us is first, proving out the network that we built years ago, still capable of delivering that kind of speed, 25, 50 gig, and being able to be ready when speeds are needed. And, besides that, also looking at what other services we can introduce to customer with this kind of capabilities.
What was the business case that was driving these trials in the first place? I assume it wasn't just to test out the technology, right? Tell us a little bit about those motivators, and maybe if there was a specific customer type or use case pushing demand for these next gen ultra high speeds.
As we had deployed quite a bit of PON infrastructure out there, our approach was what can we do with those infrastructure we have deployed without needing to introduce extensive Ethernet type network to deliver customers that wanting this kind of high speed. So our main target initially was really on commercial client, right? This is not individual customers per se, but it doesn't prevent us from doing that. But our target is really pushing into the commercial envelope using infrastructure that we already deployed, because the infrastructure that support 25 gig PON is just a card on the existing PON chassis that we already deployed. So now, if we have commercial customer at that last mile that we want to deploy, we can deploy this fairly quickly without having to invest on significant switch Ethernet type technology. So, PON is what we want to do from our perspective is give us an options, either switch Ethernet or PON, to meet the customer demand, right? And the most cost-effective way. So that's our intention here. And, we're excited with this first customer field deployment. And our hope is this is something that, we can scale more to other customers. I think what we're looking at, as much as we can leverage our existing infrastructure, it will benefit us from time to market and quick to deploy the services, but also benefit the end user by leveraging the existing infrastructure investment. We can manage the cost of deployment and the cost of the service.
What I love about this use case is it's really shining a light on making more out of what we've already got, right? A lot of the conversations we've had on Wavelengths have been around broadband infrastructure deployment and all of the headaches that come from organizing the various moving pieces, putting this federal funding and state funding to work, to actually see some positive build outs for, let's say, fiber in rural communities across the US. But what I like about this use case and what we can learn here is that y'all are leveraging existing fiber infrastructure for next gen PON. And when we're talking about improving high-speed internet access, we should also be looking at ways to leverage existing infrastructure to continue to push on ultra-high-speed internet technologies and their access by key communities. With that in mind, I'm curious, in practical terms, how far are we, do you think, from being able to commercialize these kinds of speeds, right? Whether we're talking residential, enterprise, or public sector, do you think any specific communities will be able to commercialize these speeds a little faster? I guess, based on what you've learned from this rollout with Nokia, what does that timeline look like, and what are the barriers or motivators that are meeting that timeline?
I think from 25 gig perspective, probably Nokia is the only vendor out there that support 25 gig currently, right? The rest of the vendors in the space following the track of 50 gig. I do think that this will push the envelope on additional competing technology from the traditional switch Ethernet infrastructure, and by eliminating the need of having routing, switching, and all that stuff at the edge, make the network much simpler. It's a passive network, right? And then the only active device as the customer prem is the ONT. And I think for us is, if we can leverage this infrastructure that we have already built and extend to provide additional service, to your point, to businesses, to school, to hospitals, to medical offices, this is where I think we can start looking at the end of the day, to me, is how do we drive this solution further into the market and not burdening the consumer or the operator with additional costs. This is more about pushing the envelope on the existing infrastructure without needing to deploy brand new infrastructure to support certain network or services. I think this is where we're looking at this and say, hey, we're already delivering up to 10 gig to you guys now. We can even go up to 25 gig with the existing system that we have for you. So from your end, you don't have to do, from the customer end, they don't have to do significant forklift on the infrastructure they already have. And that's kind of where we are focusing on. How do we leverage this network and extend the service without significant capital investment?
If you had to turn this into some actionable advice, what would you say broadband engineers or planners at other providers or other major players that are involved in rolling out ultra high speed next gen fiber tech, what should these players in the ecosystem be thinking about today to prepare for 25G readiness tomorrow, right? What are some of the prep steps? Like, do you recommend that the industry launch more of these trials, right, to get a feel for the technology in different regions for different use cases? How do we start to prepare the industry for what's possible with 25G and 50G?
I think one of the things, looking at where fiber deployment, even in my early stage of deploying fiber network, we tend to focus on the residential customers. I think when we look at where we're deploying these services, especially with fiber, I think one of the things we also need to do a better job on is looking at what are the business surrounding the residential network that we can incorporate part of the deployment. That also will help from the use case standpoint, from the capital allocation standpoint, that you can leverage the same network to support the business and the residential customers. To me, I think that's probably, when my early days of deploying fiber, we tend to focus on how do we get fiber to the home into residential customer, how do we deliver a symmetrical speed, 1 gig, 2 gig, 5 gig, 10 gig. But we don't talk much about how do we break the barrier from commercial customer standpoint. Because traditionally we look at the commercial customer, let's deliver Ethernet to them. That's the answer. Or we build fiber, we hand off fiber to them. They will manage the last mile connections, right? I think we should look at overall leveraging PON, especially with 25 gig and 50 gig will come here soon. How do we leverage this network to deliver ultra high speed bandwidth, low latency network, less active, it's a passive network. How do we leverage that more to support the other businesses you're looking at? I mean, some of the things, like how do you expand this to edge computing? Those kind of services, when we start putting all those together, now the deployment of fiber start to make sense versus just focusing on residential business, because I think the economics is still pretty expensive when you start looking at rural market and all that. But if you're looking at this as multi-year project, how do you leverage the same technology to extend service to different kind of a segment that you can serve?
Pragash, thank you for the intel there on y'all's trial cases, again, for 25G and 50G PON. If folks want to learn more about that, head to Hotwire's website for some more information. So, Pragash, something else that I want to tap into here with you has to do with some of Hotwire's strategic differentiators. This is something that I want to learn from for our audience here and provide some actionable insights on. So this would be y'all's community-based approach to service design. So whether this is, tailoring your fission services to a retirement community or optimizing performance for high traffic student housing, right? Y'all's model relies on understanding and delivering to hyper local needs, but at scale. That's not necessarily unique for the industry. I mean, obviously there naturally is going to be use case specific servicing. The infrastructure and the services themselves have to match with their use case. But I wanted to get a sense for how you, now as CTO of this, operation, how you have been approaching that kind of use case specific rollout for next gen ultra speed technologies, because I think this will give us some learning lessons for the whole industry on how we can better attune the next generation of infrastructure and services to the actual needs of today's working or learning or collaboration environments. So let's start here. What are some of the key operational or design differences you're noting? And we'll use these as examples, but feel free to speak a little more generally, right? Operational or design differences when building for, let's say, a student housing community versus a senior living facility, right? And use those more as examples to draw attention to how y'all are thinking through the unique fiber and broadband needs for different environments and the trends that are shaping how communication happens in those environments.
The core infrastructure, it's similar. Everything is fiber, right? We lean on fiber. Fiber is the foundation of everything we do. Now, when we get to the senior living, for example, they may not require the super high speed that we provide. Right now, we offer up to 10 gig to our customer. They may not need that, but they want a more comprehensive service, such as our video packaging, our voice service, and also connectivity across the properties. So when they move from their garden style home or mixed use facility, going to the pool or whatnot, the connectivity is there. It's seamless connectivity across. So we provide that private Wi-Fi network, and then we provide managed Wi-Fi for their outdoor experience. so them going from location to location, they have seamless connectivity. And then when you look at student housing, typically what we do there is 100% managed Wi-Fi. So because they want to share the experience, that SSID they use across the entire campus location or their student housing or whatnot. So those are things that we focus on. And on the student housing, bandwidth probably more focused for them than video services or not. We still provide video service, but that might not be the focus for the students, because they want reliable internet service and seamless connectivity across the student housing. So those are things that we tailor with either the property manager or the HOA, and we go step by step every single requirement they need to have, right? So that's kind of where, when we talking about customization, that's what we customize. It's the last mile. We have different solution for different environment. We have the traditional Wi-Fi solution, and then we have the managed Wi-Fi solution. So those are things that we leverage, kind of the tool in our toolbox to meet the customer need. And from the senior living also, we also provide extended service, such as, besides just a fiber network, we do provide customer education session, virtual education sessions. Those are things that we do above and beyond, that I think is unique to Hotwire when we provide service, because it's not one size fits all. For the senior living, they typically require a bit more hand holding than the student housing, where typically younger populations, and they are pretty well versed with internet. All they need is connectivity, and then they typically bring their own, either they bring their over the top video or whatnot, and we want to be able to support every single customers that need our service. That's slightly, I think, unique than my previous experience providing service to end user. And I think, beside technology, you can see, for Hotwire, service and quality is number one. So we have this three pillar: service, quality, technology. We want to be the best on all three. I think it's possible to do it if you do it right. And our foundation of delivering this is fiber. Fiber technology is the foundation of everything we touch.
I'm curious how y'all are working with the local stakeholders for each of these kinds of use cases, right? Property developers, municipalities, facility managers, even, the folks who run some of these environments know pretty well how people use the environments, right? What does peak bandwidth look like? What types of devices are often coming in and out? What are the safety risks, etc.? So with all of that in mind, what are some of y'all's approaches for how you work with those local stakeholders or those use case specific stakeholders to ensure that infrastructure and internet packages and access actually aligns with the long-term goals for that community and for that use case? What does that interplay look like, and how do you ensure everyone's needs are met?
We have, in each of our market, we have our market GM, and also we have the local account manager. So they are in tune with the market. They know exactly what the profile of the building. They are embedded into community, from not just trying to sell our service. They are part of the local Rotary Club chapter, or they are part of a local community event. We are very much embedded into the community, and they know the needs of this property from not just the day they went and pitched the solution, but they follow trend, and they look at what's out there and so on, right? So our GM and our account manager, really the foot on the ground, doing all this lead work. At the same time, we also have what we call our sales engineering team, that we pair with them to provide the technical part of some of the solution that they're looking at. But for us, Daniel, what we do is we provide typically a baseline service. So since it's an HOA, it's provided as, okay, this is the baseline package that everybody get. Typically right now we offer 500 meg symmetrical or 1 gig symmetrical. That's the typical options we have out there. And then from there, each individual user have an option to upgrade to different tier as they see fit if they need more. We sell up to the 10 gig bond solution. The beauty of the network we deploy is that we can do a lot of this without needing to roll a truck. So for example, by mid-year this year, our access point that we're deploying, a Wi-Fi 7, can support up to 5 gig. And then if someone wants beyond the 5 gig, then we have to go and replace the access point. But everything else remain the same. So the way we look at this network is, how do we provide service based on the customer need without needing to constantly doing truck roll or touch the infrastructure? It's about all the backend smart and flow through provisioning system that we have, the OSS BSS that we have built. That's the key, because for us, it's not just about deploying the service. How do we maintain this network? Typically, when we sign this deal with this property, the contract lasts for 10 years. And how do we make sure there's not much disruption on their daily life as we progress to our the relationship with the property? And that's, I think, the beauty of what we've done out there, is the ability to upgrade your speed without needing a lot of hand holding and interruption to what you already have.
And if you had to hone in on the most important dynamics shaping some of these, use case specific rollouts or use case inspired improvements to or expansions to, different internet packages and investments in new technology, right? Where would you say that focus is today, right? Like, where are some of these downstream use cases? Let's say student housing, like high traffic student housing. It's just an example, but if we use that as an example, like, what are some of the most practical elements that are dictating the needs for that kind of use case, right? Is it device traffic? Is it how the internet is being used? Is it security and safety? I guess what are the elements that are taking up more focus that you find you're having to collaborate on and ensure focus on, right, with these use case specific rollouts?
I think, if you look at student housing, is providing those consistent speed throughout. We used to, if you recall, prior to pandemic, we used to look at bandwidth to say, okay, when is our peak hour start? When is customer watching most of the content, right? We look at it, we say, okay, from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. at night, that's kind of our peak period. These days, that does not apply anymore, right? Because the student in the class, they need the connectivity. When they get back to their dorm, they need their connectivity. So to us, is making sure we are able to provide the service 24/7, 365. To us right now, looking at service we provide, we look at broadband. It's like utilities. And sometimes I think people even think, even though they don't have power, they still need their internet connection. And we look at this as, we want to make sure this service works no matter what, from the time they wakes up or even before they wakes up, because all the IoT devices probably connected, to the same network, right? And their security system or whatnot, their door lock and so on. And if you look at the HOA community, you have the front gate camera, and those are things that we look at. We say, this service has to be 24/7, 365. We cannot afford to have downtime. This is why when we deploy this network, we look at scenarios such as, if there's a power outage, how much battery backup we need in local market. And once the battery depleted by 50%, now we have to deploy our portable generators. This is why I think one of the reasons why Hotwire tend to be the preferred provider in this market that we serve, because we look at this as not just solving the problem that controlled by Hotwire, but also some of this uncontrollable situation with power, storm, and so on. We tend to believe that we have the responsibility to make sure the service is up 24/7, 365. We can't turn around and say, hey, it's not our problem, it's a power company's outage, hey, we had a storm. Customers these days do not care. Because there's options, because there's other means of getting connectivity, people will switch if we don't address those use cases where previously, I think, if I look back 10 years ago, that wasn't the biggest problem that we have to solve for. We can still say, it's a power company issue. These days, to us, that doesn't work. And we can't use that as an excuse to just not provide service.
I mean, it's a great point, right? The power that the end user now has in, better dictating expectations around internet speeds and access and standards, I think has only been elevated. And even if, the end user doesn't have a direct line toward choosing their internet provider, like let's say they're a student and they're at a dorm for the semester, right? The dorm is going to have its specific provider and infrastructure. But with enough poor feedback and, a lot of parents and students paying a lot of money, if the feedback is, hey, your internet is terrible, fix this, well, that university is going to not necessarily wait for their provider to reinvest in their infrastructure and provide better solutions, but they're probably going to shop around and try to find someone fresh, right? So it's a great point. These strategic rollouts for the future of fiber, whether that's new infrastructure or new services on top of that infrastructure, they need to really be motivated by true customer need. And they need to be able to anticipate customer need as well in these unique use cases. So I want to now draw some insights from you on strategic fiber expansion and how the industry should balance innovation, cost, and customer needs on this specific front. So let's check this side of things out. What is your framework, Pragash, for deciding whether to upgrade existing fiber, overbuild, or expand to new territories when the dollars are there and you're weighing investment in, again, new infrastructure or, maybe new services on top of that infrastructure? When does it actually make sense to put some money behind upgrading fiber, right? Putting money behind infrastructure versus trying to experiment with new services on top of existing infrastructure? What's your framework for mapping that out?
I think, at Hotwire, I consider myself fortunate because our CEO believe you have to have fiber to deliver these services. So we typically, even where we want property from our competitors that has coax infrastructure or non-fiber infrastructure, we upgrade the network. We do not believe that we can provide what we need to provide with using the existing infrastructure unless it's fiber. So our approach has always been invest on the infrastructure. As I mentioned earlier, this contract, that this property that we want typically lasts for 10 years. We want to make sure we not keep going back and trying to upgrade or trying to patch the network or whatnot, which I think that create other issues from customer satisfaction standpoint, right? And so we take the approach of fiber is a must, it's not an option. And also when we do that, we also look at saying, how do we make sure these properties are on our network versus someone else fiber? We may have to take an interim steps of leveraging circuit or whatnot, but our goal is always bringing property into our own fiber. That's always the case, and we believe by doing that, we have control over what we can deliver, and we can make promises that we can deliver versus relying on a circuit provider or whatnot. But for others that, if you're looking at getting into fiber and you say, hey, the cost is too expensive. Yes, but maybe there's other approach you can take besides fiber, maybe extending the network with a combination of wireless and fiber until you get to some penetration or time to build the network with 100% fiber, right? There is few things you can do from entering the market, but over time, for us, fiber is the key. We would not provide service to market that we can't control the infrastructure. I mean, that's been the business, and that's it's proven to be successful for us. The other thing, you look at it is, don't look at just what's my initial investment. You got to look at the entire TCO. Your truck roll, your call volume, and all that stuff that combined together. You have to put a case together and say, what, fiber makes sense than just doing what we're doing right now to provide the service. I mean, for us, what we put out in the ground 20 years ago is capable of providing the service that we just talked about earlier, right? 25 gig, 50 gig, and it's still providing the same quality of service.
What is your approach as CTO for balancing current and future needs, right? There are current customers, current stakeholders putting pressure around, here's what we need, infrastructure to provide now, or here's what our customers are demanding now. And then there are all of the innovation timelines, the trials, the, infrastructure rollouts, commercializing and building a business plan around new services. So what's your approach for helping guide and balance timelines around innovation that are natural and meeting current expectations, managing current expectations, and delivering on the current needs of the customer and your ecosystem? What are your thoughts there, your strategies?
At Hotwire, as I mentioned, we focus on, our key focus is building the right infrastructure to provide to overlay services. Then what we do in addition to that, we partner with vendor partners that can help us along the way. To your point, we can't be innovating every single technologies out there, but our primary focus is the infrastructure. Then we partner with our managed Wi-Fi vendor. We partner with our IoT service provider. We partner with builders, making sure that we can support, integrate what they need quickly. But I think by having the right foundation and the right network layer, that set us up for the success. One other thing we are looking at is, as we look future, how do we leverage technologies such as AI and self-healing network to provide better support from knowing what, predicting network usage much better, predicting operation issue much better. Those are things that we're working with our partners to overlay on top of our network, so it doesn't require for the customer to tell us when they have issues, because the application demand continue to evolve, and we cannot wait for the time someone to call and say, hey, my internet is not working, or I'm having problem with this application. Our focus this year and next year really looking at automation, AI, proactive self-healing services. And doesn't mean that we're not going to provide the white glove service that we always provide. That's always there for people who wants it. But our approach is, we want to meet our customer where they want us to meet them, not to point them to, hey, you can only use this type of support if you have issues, or this is the only thing that's available from Hotwire. No, I think for us is, we want to make sure we have the foundation sets us right for success, and then overlaying those technology on top of us. Smart cities getting a lot of attraction now, right? We could provide the infrastructure and overlaying all those services on top of our infrastructure to provide those kind of services. And I think my focus as a CTO is going out there, speaking to our customer, understand what they are expecting, not just this 10 years, I want to make sure after 10 years, they still renew with Hotwire for another 10 years. Yeah. And we have use cases, customers that have renewed with us it for the third time, which means they're going to be with us for 30 years. And the reason we can do that is because I think we have the right foundation, and we can overlay innovation and services fairly quickly by leveraging our vendor partners and solution providers.
A healthy ecosystem makes for rapid response times and rapid innovation potential. I'm glad you mentioned that too. As part of that ecosystem, though, I'm curious how things like government funding programs, so like BEAD funding, for example, or subsidy mechanisms, how are these influencing your strategic roadmaps and some of the guidance you just gave, right? Are these playing a front-facing role in, influencing what's possible and what isn't? Or do you have other advice and strategies for, how players in the industry can operate slightly more agile, right? Or a little leaner without having to rely on those mechanisms? I mean, what's your take on that role, the role of government funding programs and subsidy mechanisms in defining these strategies?
We have not, approached the government subsidy in our planning to date. Doesn't mean that we're not going to do it, but not till this year. We have not done anything from the government funding standpoint. But what we have done is that partner with large builders to figure out how we can help them during the early stage of deployment of this infrastructure. We have a partnership with a home builder, Lennar, for example. They are getting into new territories for us where we are the preferred service provider. So we are able to partner with them from the beginning of the construction of the home. So if you look at that now, you have, the joint trench, and you can deploy much more cost effective versus having to go and build the infrastructure versus the brownfield standpoint, right? We're entering the market as a new service provider in a new area. So those partnership works well for us, but we have not approached the government funding as, a key mechanism to drive our penetration to date.
Cool, noted. Just got to make sure to ask. That's a recurring theme across the podcast here. All right, last question here is looking ahead a little bit. You mentioned this yourself, where a lot of your future-focused strategies are being influenced by the ecosystem of supplemental technologies and investments, things like AI-powered ecosystem support. I'm curious what your vision is for how this technology is going to shape rollout strategies and service strategies for the industry moving forward. Maybe in a more focused fashion here for a question, as we move toward more decentralized AI-enhanced service models, how should broadband players, whether that's the infrastructure side of things or the service side of things, how should they evolve to keep pace with that technology and better make use of the ways that AI-enabled support and service can elevate, right, some of the relationships and some of the work that y'all are doing with your stakeholders? What are your thoughts there?
You look at where AI and automation, I think, plays the role from the beginning of the process of building the infrastructure. If you look at going back, in the old days, what we used to do, we used to send someone to do survey before we go and build the infrastructure, right? Now with the enhancement of LiDAR and AI, you typically don't have to do 100% survey of the network that you want to build. I think those are the technology and solution that we need to start embracing to bring the cost of deploying this network to more manageable versus relying on just human to do everything. I think the human piece is important, from validation, making sure we're building it right, making sure we taking into consideration the customer expectation standpoint, but embedding some automation and AI into our overall, I will call it, fiber build life cycle and support has to be there. Otherwise, to compete in this market is just going to be much and much harder, because I think, expectation cost per passing to go down it's already embedded on everybody's mind. And you just can't continue to say, hey, my vendor need to drive the cost lower. But I think we also need to look at how we do things better and smarter to bring the cost lower. And technology is available these days for us to look at, the from survey, from design, from the GIS perspective, and even some of the QC tool out there that you can look at, AI based, that do a better job than sometimes human, because anything you can repeat, computer tend to do better than human, right? Of course, we're not there yet with automation of someone digging the trenches for fiber and all that. We still need people to do that, but some of the front end process and some of the QC pieces and some of the network support side of the, we need to embrace automation and AI. That's kind of what my focus. And even from customer perspective, self-service, how you can embed this technology into the app or your mobile or your website to take advantage of learning customer behavior and providing them catered, more personalized experience.
All right, Pragash, thank you so much for your insights today. I appreciate you walking us through some of Hotwire's recent work, what we can learn from your leadership as CTO on managing these various moving pieces shaping the future of fiber. But it sounds like one of the big takeaways then is, while we're constantly talking as an industry about reinvestment in new fiber infrastructure, we also need to be thinking about what can we be testing and innovating on and improving around our existing infrastructure, right? And I think those are parallel tracks that need to be, taking methodical steps every day, every week, however you want to pace it out. And it's great to know that yourself and your team at Hotwire are taking lead, right? And helping lead the charge on some of these innovations for existing infrastructure to better meet today's and tomorrow's customer needs for high-speed, reliable internet. So thank you again, folks. We've been chatting with Pragash Pillai. He's Chief Technology Officer at Hotwire Communications. Pragash, if folks have any questions or maybe they want to tap into your thought leadership or some of Hotwire's work, right? Where can we point them? Where can they learn more?
Like you said, they can visit Hotwire's website, and they can also visit my LinkedIn page. They can send message there, and be happy to share some of the lesson learned and how we can further advance the technology forward. And also, Hotwire Communication.com. I think you can find a lot of information there. So,
all right, Pragash Pillai, thank you so much for your analysis today, and I'm looking forward to more thought leadership and more debates here on the future of the industry very soon. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Appreciate it. Take care.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to today's episode of Wavelengths, an Amphenol Broadband Solutions podcast. If you like what you heard and saw today and you want to tap into previous episodes of the show, more actionable tips, hot takes, and debates, make sure you're heading to our website, amphenolbroadband.com, and subscribe to Wavelengths on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And make sure you go and check out Pragash Pillai and the rest of his team's work at Hotwire Communications to get your own insights and takes on some of the ways that they're leading in the industry. All right, folks, thanks again. We'll catch you on the next episode of Wavelengths. I'm your host, Daniel Litwin, the voice of B2B, and we'll see you on the next one.